Hello and welcome to Sprott Radio. I'm your host, Ed Coyne, Senior Managing Partner at Sprott. I'm pleased today to welcome a new guest, Mark Nelson, Managing Director and Founder of Radiant Energy Group. Mark, thank you for joining me today on Sprott Radio.
Good to be here, Ed.
Well, Mark, I'd love to get into kind of all things nuclear, uranium, energy, and so forth. But before we do that, tell us a bit about yourself and then tell us about the company you started, Radiant Energy Group.
Sure. I'm from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, come out a long line of oil and gas people and caught the clean energy bug when I was young. Just didn't get anything out of looking at wind turbines, even though I was an aerospace engineering student at the time. And suddenly I saw a viral YouTube video about nuclear power. And a few minutes in, I realized that's the thing for me. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make clean energy, and it's going to win, and it's going to beat out oil and gas. And although my attitudes have moderated a little bit, I still retain a lot of that story of coming in because I cared specifically about clean energy, but wanting to do something that was a really hard, muscular engineering and social lift to get done right.
I had to make sure I was reading it correctly when I looked at your degree you got at Cambridge, because I was thinking philosophy and nuclear energy. How do those two meld together? Help me understand that. And what do you do with that?
Cambridge is an ancient university. It is over 800 years old. It has weird ancient traditions, words, systems, bureaucracies. It's not like other places, and I love it for that. But one of the things that's weird is that almost everywhere else still has a doctor of philosophy or doctorate of philosophy, PhD. But almost everybody's dropped the former name of the master degree called Master of Philosophy. It just is sort of the highest ranking master's degree offered by the university.
Good on you for getting that over the finish line.
Well, thank you. You can imagine what it felt like to be obsessed about nuclear energy in 2012, a full decade before it broke out into the general air of our times through the energy crisis and the war in Ukraine.
The Renaissance, the nuclear energy renaissance. Talk about that. What's driving that? Who's behind it? Where's the money coming from? Can we go into that a bit?
Sure. There's a nuclear cultural renaissance that is new. It is true. It is fundamentally different from the last things called a nuclear renaissance. And it has more in common with the incredible optimism around nuclear in the first great nuclear age. The difference is the cultural optimism, people who know nothing really about energy, nothing much in particular about nuclear physics or engineering, who now love nuclear energy and feel that they're being cool by talking about it. And I say they are cool for talking about it. Nuclear is cool now. That is not exactly the same thing as the value of an existing nuclear plant. It's not the same thing as whether we're going to build nuclear successfully or not. But I would argue it makes a rich environment for us to go and try to build nuclear in. It means all sorts of cultural protection and cultural opportunities are available for nuclear this time. So it really, truly is on us in the nuclear industry if we mess this one up. So that's the cultural renaissance. And we can talk a little bit more about it and what the signs were and where it came from. But let's talk about something that we know without a doubt is more solid financially than the cultural renaissance. You can cash it in more, but it's also here today as opposed to the construction renaissance that we're hoping to build together as an industry over the next few years. And that is the renaissance in the value of existing nuclear plants. Several things are happening at once. One, there's a huge need in the West for steady energy, clean if you can get it, dirty if that's all you have available. Nuclear fits the bill perfectly. If you have an existing nuclear plant, it's one of the most precious and prestigious objects in the energy world now. Only 3 or 4 years ago, nuclear plants were often albatrosses on the necks of the utilities that owned and operated them. Nuclear plants were being driven to their destruction, both through policy, punitive taxes, and just the sheer economics of competing against natural gas in liberalized electricity markets that did not take into account the difference between a long-lived, steady operating nuclear asset and a shorter-lived natural gas market-dependent gas turbine asset. So nuclear plants are now extremely valuable. A few years ago, they weren't so valuable. That is an undeniable financial renaissance for nuclear. And just to put some very rough numbers here, to operate a nuclear plant in America takes about $30 a megawatt hour of expenses. That assumes that you are running your nuclear plant full out, and the amount that you're spending is not really changing each year based on how much power you produce. So you better produce full out about $30 a megawatt hour. The value of nuclear electricity on the open market before the most recent renaissance of value in nuclear plants was anywhere from $45 to $50 a megawatt hour. Maybe I'll say a bigger range, anywhere from 35 to 60, depending on where you were located, what deals you did. So that meant that the profit was barely enough to justify the risk of owning a nuclear asset.
Mm-hmm.
And there was very little penalty for shutting down a nuclear asset because you already had a big decommissioning fund that, with the increased experience in decommissioning nuclear, you could be pretty certain was sufficient to cover all your costs. When we weren't good at decommissioning nuclear plants, or it wasn't a competitive business, we didn't know for sure whether the decommissioning funds, the trust funds, were enough. So you might be left with some risk that you might not be able to decommission your plant profitably. But now we don't have that issue. So the temptation was really strong to decommission nuclear and move on to other types of electricity generation, or to get out of electricity generation entirely. So the value of nuclear now has gone from making it at, say, $30 a megawatt hour and selling it for a few dollars a megawatt hour profit, maybe, all the way to being able to do 10, 15, and 20-year deals for 80, 90, or $100 a megawatt hour or more. That means you're not just, it's the amount that you're increasing the revenue is significant, but the amount that you're increasing the profit of a nuclear plant is vast. I'm not saying that it's an absolute sure thing that we'll never lose another nuclear plant, but that's the thing. This renaissance is happening right as our nuclear plants are hitting 35, 40, 50, 60 years of age, which is revealing both a market for very old nuclear plants to stay around, but also unprecedented profit for those nuclear plants super late into what was popularly thought to be their lifespan. It takes up to $1 billion for very expensive custom retrofitting. That will easily be worth it to keep a plant in service that might make half of that back each year in profit if you do the retrofit and keep the plant around. So the nuclear plant value renaissance has occurred. The nuclear cultural renaissance is in full swing. There are people who try to be so cool that they're anti-nuclear just because everyone else is liking nuclear now. That's how culturally cool nuclear is at the moment. However, the nuclear renaissance and constructing nuclear, that's the one we still have to build together.
Right. Well, and it was cool to shut them down, right? I mean, that was a whole thing too. You had the Greenpeaces of the world. It was very in vogue to be anti-nuclear. So the pendulum certainly is swinging. You know, I guess about a year and a half ago or so, I had Heather Hoff on. I don't know if you know Heather Hoff at all, but
I know her
Mothers
well.
from
I've worked
Nuclear.
with her
Yeah,
since
so
2000.
she was, directly involved with Diablo Canyon, and that was kind of, to me, a great example of a state like California going from being aggressively wanting to shut it down to keeping it open, both for energy needs, but also for economic needs. That was the tip of the spear, it felt like. And that was about a year and a half ago. I talked to Heather about that. And
that was a very hard-fought campaign that I was
yes,
in.
it was.
Pretty much months after it started, that was the first thing I worked on the very first day of my first proper job in nuclear energy, was stopping that closure. And that was a fight that went on for another 6 years, and in some ways still is going on a little bit. There are still factions that cannot openly be anti-nuclear that are working to try to still stop Diablo Canyon from continuing. So although it's much better protected than it was, there's still work to be done. It's not just California that said, we don't want nuclear, we want nuclear. It's individuals in California. Gavin Newsom was a lieutenant governor who specifically worked to bring about the end of Diablo Canyon so he could prove his leadership abilities in doing what he thought was the future.
Right.
And then he specifically made it possible and helped engineer the saving of the nuclear plant, both times without wanting to actually publicly take any leadership position in saying he was doing so. But
that's politics.
That's inhuman, right? We've seen that in France. In France, Macron ran on shutting down at least 14 nuclear plants. Not for any reason, not because it was good for the economy, just to prove he had what it took to destroy his own nation's energy supply. Then, the next time he ran for president, he ran on adding 14 nuclear plants. That one is beautiful in its symmetry. He just changed from a negative to positive sign. Same tone of voice, same energy, same ambition. That is the difference between the late 2010s and the early 2020s. That's the magnitude of change brought about partly by the cultural renaissance, but also by a thing that threw a big pot of gasoline on the cultural renaissance and the nuclear value renaissance. That's the energy crisis of 2021, 2022.
Mm. This pendulum is swinging. Well, I guess who's driving that then? Doesn't sound like the politicians are actually driving it. Is it what you're hearing out there with tech and data centers and AI? Are they driving it? Are they making it cool? Like, what's the driving force behind this? Why are people now saying, hey, we need more nuclear?
The cultural revolution was going in full swing before the AI companies realized that they needed nuclear. In fact, big tech was, if anything, on the opposite side. They had a bunch of people within the big tech companies that were hired to whitewash the image of the companies. And the way to do that was to attack nuclear and only do renewables. Now, the people at the top of the companies, like the founders of the company, that was just like a business decision way down there in the dirt, right? Just like energy was part of the thing that you did along with corporate marketing, reputation washing, ESG, investor relations. The big tech companies were also sponsoring environmental groups to basically go to war against industrial electricity. I mean, look at it. If you're a big tech company and you're worth $1 trillion, and you're a pathetic little national champion steel company that's only worth $20 billion, you see, like, do we really need power supplies to make steel in America? No, let's have big tech instead. What happened is that big tech suddenly invented itself into the realization that it itself was an industry, an industrial sector. In fact, they needed not just as much electricity as some of these big industrials, they needed more, and they needed it now, and they needed it at almost any price as long as they could get it. It was guaranteed and it was steady. That was a huge seismic revelation that happened about 3 years ago. I can't help but see a connection between the realization by the AI companies, oh, wait, we're not at war against industrial electricity. We are industrial electricity. So that was helpful, but it meant that they had to be careful about financing these anti-nuclear groups to go do damage just because it fit in with the culture of the people, the non-technical people they were hiring to do energy reputation laundering. Because obviously these big tech companies were always using steady grid power. They weren't using renewables. They were building renewables. They were maybe owning some renewables. They were putting renewables far away out in the countryside, but they were building their data centers where they needed the data centers. They were plugging into the grid and they were saying all the numbers will work out in the wash. Well, that was true until they needed 10x and then 100x power. And suddenly it did not all come out in the wash. You could launder the clean certificates all you wanted, and that wouldn't give you electrons. That wouldn't give you the ability to hook up a city's worth of power next year on the grid in a place where there are no more steady power plants. And it didn't matter how many certificates you trucked in from Wyoming or something, saying, oh, last year I generated 2 spins of a wind turbine or something. That did not power a Northern Virginia data center. And the executive teams had to learn that about energy for the first time after the big AI boom.
The two terms I hear all the time, 24 baseload. No one ever said the word 24 baseload 2 years ago.
Wait, Ed, they did. They said it was a myth.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
And I mean, there were groups sponsored by and working directly with the big tech companies who had a range of opinions. Some said that baseload is a myth. It doesn't exist. It's fossil and nuclear people trying to tell you that we can't do it all. Almost nobody with any kind of professional standing still says that, and they quietly scrub that they ever thought it or said it. That's gone. Baseload is back. So there's that. But some of the groups say Google knew by the late 2010s that they needed nuclear eventually. It wasn't so much that there was political consensus within the company to buy nuclear power. Google could have dominated the world by buying nuclear power super cheap a long time ago, but they knew they needed it, but they didn't buy it because it was still politically untenable, not just like outside generally in democratic or like ESG aligned circles. It was untenable internally, And it wasn't enough to break out above the heads of the departments to like the top of the companies. As far as I can tell, I'm still trying to map out what exactly happened socially inside from companies that needed constant power, more of it every year, and refused to buy nuclear when it was dirt cheap. At Google, we know for sure they knew they needed steady power as far back as 2018, 19. 2021, 22 comes around, they start talking about clean power, clean, firm power,
Right.
firm, steady, 24/7, clean, firm, 24/7. They couldn't quite say nuclear. Finally, in 2023, they were willing to show up at nuclear events and say the word nuclear. It was very hard, and it was already after this massive explosion in power costs and after this massive explosion in the expectations of needing more power at Google. And then what was fascinating was Amazon. Amazon went straight from not buying nuclear, refusing to talk about nuclear, no nuclear, only renewables, to suddenly buying 1 million people's worth of nuclear electricity overnight
Right.
from an existing plant, not additional or anything. And they didn't talk about it at all. They didn't say we did this because we want to be clean. They didn't say we did this, but we're planning to add more nuclear. It was just out of the blue buying just under a gigawatt of nuclear power early last year. We also have things like this. In California, the little blackout that scared Gavin Newsom into trying to save Diablo instead of close it was something you probably could avoid in the future without even having Diablo. Or, it might have been something that would have happened regardless of the status of nuclear in the state. Could have been a distribution issue, or transmission, not even a generation. I mean, it was a close call on generation, but I'm just saying I would not count on his reaction to that blackout being about a super in-depth knowledge of electricity and electricity systems. Would he have done that without the little power blackout? In Southern California, it's not clear. Maybe, you might hope, but there's a sense in some parts of the nuclear community that people will just learn their lesson when the first blackouts hit. Maybe. I've heard that there was a change in heart at the top of the European Union because of the Spanish blackout, which is still being harshly negotiated in expert communities. What was at fault? Who was at fault? Did the nuclear make it better? Did the nuclear make it worse? Was it really from renewables? Was it from transmission? You have to be actually an expert to pick apart that debate. And if you're reporting on it while not being a technically trained expert, you are going to be able to choose whichever side and make a plausible story for it fits your existing bias. So here's the thing. It may be true that little blackouts scare people and cause change. I do not count myself in the camp where I'm hoping or wanting secretly for that to happen in order for people to wake up. Not. I will also reconfirm that people do apparently care about clean power.
Sure.
They don't necessarily know what it means. They have an expectation, I think even a right, that those of us on the technical side or the political side can deliver the clean power. And I mean, that's the fight for nuclear, to deliver your cake and let you eat it too, to have nuclear and have the steady power going to new industries, existing homes. There's no reason we can't have that. But that brings us to the question of why we haven't gotten there yet. If the culture is moving in our direction, politics is starting to move in our directions, and without a doubt, the market value of existing nuclear has absolutely moved in our direction. Why haven't we started building today? So what is the real problem in nuclear? It's not the availability of fuel. The price goes up, we're going to find more fuel. It's not the waste. That's a marketing problem. That's a politics problem, and we're going to have amazing politics and amazing marketing. We're going to figure that out. It's not the cost of operating these nuclear plants, which is also part of the function of the fuel cost. Once you get the nuclear plant up and running, that is an incredible supply of energy. It's not the longevity of the nuclear investment. If you can build a nuclear plant, you will make your money back eventually. Pretty much no matter how much you spend, if that nuclear plant gets built, you may not be alive when your money keeps coming back to you, but you will recover your costs because nuclear plants are cheap to operate, very long-lived, and we understand our current nuclear technology so well, we get very high reliability performance. So, what is the weakness of nuclear? It's that at the moment, it requires a lot of people to work together over a long period of time in good faith, with a lot of trust, a lot of commitment, a lot of quality to get the job done. And it's hard for a lot of people to work together now. You can say maybe our attention spans are low. There's too many lawyers. There's so many factions. We don't have the right entities. We haven't aligned the incentives. But all of those excuses are starting to fall away, and it's up to us to pull together the projects, put the right leadership and financial structure in place, and then rule the construction projects with an iron hand. Whatever contractors come in, you need an iron control over nuclear plants. That historically is what's gotten these plants built. Somebody had a brutal iron fist and controlled quality, schedule, pacing, supply chains. You cannot expect somebody to rock up and say, I'll sell you a nuclear plant. Just trust us. Just give us the contract. You must be an intelligent customer of your nuclear fleet.
So who does it best right now? If you had to look at kind of globally, I've heard Korea, who's doing it the best right now from what you've seen?
The Chinese utilities are doing it best within a super stable internal context. That's mainland China. The Russians are doing it best in strange new climates and strange new locations. So the Russians are best at delivering in very weird, difficult political and widely spaced geographical and climate settings. The Chinese slightly beat the Russians in time and schedule and cost, but they're building inside for themselves in a 100% homogenous environment, culturally, politically. So there's an enormous amount to be learned from both that is translatable to projects in the West. We don't have to import the Chinese Communist Party. We don't have to have Putin. We don't even have to have the full structure of Rosatom or anything like that. We don't have to use their designs. By just definition of building nuclear over and over and over the last 15 years of changing communication technology, changing personnel, they have proven out concepts for making nuclear job sites go faster. And there is plenty to learn that is removable from their cultural context, that is part of the nuclear construction site context internationally. So that's part of it. I think we need enough pain and hunger for the energy combined with the Cultural Revolution and it being in the national interest as acknowledged by enough of the political apparatus that we're committing over long periods of time. I think there's a really beautiful moment coming where we have this pensions crisis all over the world, which fundamentally is there's not enough people working to support a lot of people getting older. The way we get around that is maybe a lot of AI for a lot of robotic help, powered by a lot of energy, powered by pensions invested in super long-term profitable production of nuclear electricity. So there's a system where we need the old folks and the money that is the old folks building the things that physically provide for the old folks and the young folks, and hopefully jobs for the young folks too. But I'm speaking in very general terms of this new movement of putting massive chunks of pension money into nuclear builds. We've just seen that with Sizewell C. And oh boy, was there a lot of room for a lot of pension money because that was a profoundly expensive project, but it was the best thing on offer for the Brits at the time, and they just needed to go for it. So the big question in Western nuclear is what are the super teams that are going to come together and under what level of risk to the governments or the investors involved?
Now you're stepping into my universe, the world of investing, which it's a cloudy, dark place, my friend.
Well, I think it's up to the nuclear industry to provide investment-worthy nuclear reactor construction projects, and that's what I work on.
Two final questions. For listeners that want to kind of track your success, your company's success, hear what you guys are doing or talking about, how can somebody who's listening on this podcast today, how can they track you down and find you?
I'm most frequently to be found on Twitter, mouthing off on the issue of the day. So on Twitter, I'm at Energy Bants. That's BANTS. It's a joke reference to my British days. You can also meet me in person if you come to the launch of the documentary that I'm a part of, September 15th at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. You'll need to get a hold of me somehow. My direct messages are open on Twitter, or you can find me on LinkedIn at Mark W. Nelson. Either of those two ways, would love to see you. If you're interested in what you're hearing, would love to see you at the premiere of my documentary. I will not be watching or listening even if I'm in the room because I don't like to see myself, but I'm in the movie and I'm wearing a nice leather jacket. So come see that movie and meet a lot of the glitterati of the nuclear industrial world.
Cool.
So September 15th, if you're around Washington, D.C., would love to see you in the early evening at that documentary premiere. You can also add me on LinkedIn, send me a message on LinkedIn, or you can email me at mark at radiantenergygroup.com.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm an older guy. I'll probably find you on LinkedIn. I didn't know this premiere thing's happening in DC. That sounds very cool.
It should be a good film. Cameco, Nucor, the nuclear company have all come together with a few others to put together a documentary about restarting nuclear construction in America.
That's cool. That's going to be really cool to watch. All right, this is the second one. This is the one that I cautiously am asking you about. What didn't I ask that you wanted to hopefully deliver to our audience today?
Do we have to have nuclear energy for an AI boom and or a clean energy revolution? In America, we actually have to get nuclear right to ensure it takes the biggest possible part of the coming AI or clean energy boom. Also in the US, there is some dependency, but not total dependency, on people caring about clean energy. Why? Because we have an enormous amount of abundant natural gas, and until we run out of it, we're going to keep producing it. So I'm not saying that people have to be scared to death about the climate. I'm not even encouraging it, especially among young people. I don't think it's a very healthy attitude. But it does matter that we do get nuclear right, because otherwise it's not guaranteed we're going to build it just because we think it's so good. Somebody will eventually.
Really appreciate you taking the time today to spend with me on Sprott Radio. Really cool to meet you over a video here and talk, and hopefully we'll cross paths at some point in person.
Yeah, I would love to.
Well, once again, my name's Ed Coyne, and thank you for listening to Sprott Radio.
This podcast is provided for information purposes only from sources believed to be reliable. However, Sprott does not warrant its completeness or accuracy. Any opinions and estimates constitute our judgment as of the date of this material and are subject to change without notice. Past performance is not indicative of future results. This communication is not intended as an offer or solicitation for the purchase or sale of any financial instrument. Any opinions and recommendations herein do not take into account individual client circumstances, objectives, or needs, and are not intended as recommendations of particular securities, financial instruments, or strategies. You must make your own independent decisions regarding any securities, financial instruments, or strategies mentioned or related to the information herein. This communication may not be redistributed or retransmitted in whole or in part, or in any form or manner without the express written consent of Sprott. Any unauthorized use or disclosure is prohibited. Receipt and review of this information constitutes your agreement not to redistribute or retransmit the contents and information contained in this communication without first obtaining express permission from an authorized officer of Sprott.